you have so much
Mm-hmm.
data, which is a blessing and a curse. Because if the data is unstructured and it can't be structured in a way that is actually digestible, or if there are any points where the data is not reliable or trustworthy, that's almost worse
Sure.
than not having access to the data, because you're waiting and then you get data that you think is accurate and you make decisions on it that are wrong.
You're listening to RevOps Champions, a podcast created for B2B leaders to help you align your people, streamline your processes, trust your data, and leverage technology in order to grow your business. We're your hosts, Brendan Denewell, CEO and co-founder of Dynamico,
and Amy Weaver, Dynamico's marketing director. When we caught up last time, you revealed that you have never had the misfortune of being at a company where there was a friction between the sales and marketing leaders or teams.
Yeah.
That blew my mind because that hasn't been my experience.
Yeah.
But I would love to hear a little bit more about how you think that works and how you think it lends itself to the company growing faster, better because of that alignment.
So I think that I don't think it's a coincidence that that has happened where I've joined companies where there isn't that level of friction, primarily because, I'm thinking back to any interview process that I've ever been in. My marketing counterpart was always part of the interview process and would have ultimately have to sign off on the hire. And obviously it's a two-way street. I have to make sure that whoever I'm going to be working with is somebody that I can work with, I can get along with, somebody who I think we could do damage together in a good way. So I don't think that's a coincidence. And I don't know if that's just something that's overlooked in a lot of interview processes or something that other sales leaders or marketing leaders are just not putting an emphasis on. But it's definitely part of my sort of scoring or grading rubric when I am evaluating opportunities.
Okay.
And the benefit of that is total alignment on targets. Whenever you step into a leadership role, sales leadership role, revenue leadership role, you're going to be handed aggressive targets, and you have to immediately start figuring out, okay, how are we going to do this? And having a partner in marketing who is fully aligned and in most cases hopefully has similar goals for themselves or for their organization in terms of this is our revenue target makes it so that you don't really feel like you're asking them to do anything that's out of their scope of influence or out of their responsibility or scope of responsibility. So whenever you can sit down and strategize and put together a plan together, like how much top of funnel do we need? How can you support middle and bottom of funnel? What do you need from us? Like whenever you can have those strategic conversations and you're talking about the same end result, makes it very harmonious.
Yeah, awesome. It sounds lovely.
It is nice. Yeah.
But I think it's important to also share, and for folks listening to realize that what Jason just shared is both, it's a philosophical approach or belief, but then it has very practical and tactical ways to make it happen, right? So you could have the philosophy, but if you're not able to then execute between the marketing and sales leader on how you're going to align in a way that is related to your objectives and results for the overall business. You talked about targets. So you go from the philosophical to the targets, which makes it real, right?
Very real.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot of very vague, high level explanation or, on how like I actually get to work with a marketing leader by design for time. And that could be a whole other MBA class on how to do that. But the point I'm really trying to bring home is that to be able to even have that conversation, to be able to even have that kind of strategic discussion, I think, like I said, part of the way that I interview and something that I learned early in my career is to have that sort of own personal scoring rubric, and knowing that sales has such a large dependence on marketing, various functions under marketing, whether it's brand, demand, inbound, outbound, anything related to marketing. Marketing is such a nebulous, like big, chunky term. To me, that is such a critical part of how I evaluate new opportunities. And again, I've been fortunate in the way that I've used that sort of objective scoring rubric to be able to choose opportunities that I know that I'm going to be working with a very capable and great marketing leader as we tackle these big, lofty goals together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
Right.
how much of a component would you say relies on the customer service aspect of it?
Yeah, more so. I think that the evolution of a lot of these revenue leadership roles that sort of straddle multiple functions has sort of changed. That rubric that I mentioned has evolved a lot over the years. It's not just the static thing that 27-year-old Jason put together and hasn't been touched. It changes all the
Sure.
time because you have to take into account macro and micro economic factors, which is constantly changing. So I think when you start to take into account learning from your experiences. Like I'm in a current role right now where we just drop the ball a lot on customer service. So we need to fix this here. But also in my mind, the next role I take, I need to make sure that customer service, customer support, customer success, whether it's under my purview or not, that is a major factor that I'm going to be evaluating in that interview process. Without a doubt. It is part of my rubric today for sure. Well, partially because I oversee the success and support side of things for our merchants. So obviously that was an important factor.
Sure.
But yeah, I think that in the world of net revenue retention being, arguably the most important metric in SaaS, it's pretty damn near impossible to hit NRR targets that you set out to without really just world-class customer service, customer support, customer success, or a combination of all of those.
Really cool. Which, of course, then, so you've sort of painted this picture, whether it's for you currently at the moment, or it sounds like you've been doing this for a long time, according to your evolving rubric, right? So you have the three teams, and I love the way you, again, just remind everybody that this is a strategic partnership between marketing and sales and now customer success or customer service. So I think you've kind of set the stage for how most businesses are set up with their revenue or go-to-market teams, which I guess, is a great segue into the topic of RevOps, which of course is why a lot of folks are listening to the RevOps champions and this particular episode is what is your expectation of how your RevOps function supports marketing, sales, and customer service?
Yeah, also part of my rubric.
Cool.
So, I think that the term RevOps, the first time I heard it was probably 2018. Prior to that, it was sales ops, marketing ops, whatever ops, special ops. But RevOps, the first time I heard that term used was I was joining a company here in Atlanta called CallRail. And there was a director of RevOps who, as part of my interview process with the chief revenue officer, I wanted to dig in more into what that function looked like at CallRail. So I spent a good amount of time learning more about what the RevOps function looked like, how it functioned, how it supported sales. Again, it's one of those things where you kind of learn either from other people's mistakes or your own mistakes. And obviously from successes as well, but you learn a lot from the mistakes that you make, which is, again, one of my favorite quotes is you win or you learn. I've mentioned that before. I think it's just one of the most principal, like basic philosophical quotes that you could apply to personal and professional. I tell my kids about it all the time. I have a 10 and a 7-year-old who play very competitive levels of soccer. So like you win or you learn. It doesn't quite land as well with them. They're like, no, we lost. I'm like, okay, never. We'll get there. We'll get there.
That means you're learning. Yeah.
It means you're learning. Exactly. So I think that from previous experiences, there were situations where there was a sales ops function siloed from marketing, siloed from customer service. So you're literally looking at Zendesk here, Salesforce here, Marketo here, and like all these silos that aren't talking to each other. And you've got 3 different stakeholders and different admins for the different silos. And that is just so confusing and slows everything down, sometimes to a grinding halt. And when you're a data-driven business and you're a data-driven leader, you want that data to be able to make decisions. You want that data at your fingertips. And when you've got silos, it makes it incredibly difficult to move as fast as you want to and sort of forces you to be like, okay, well, I'll wait for that data. And now I have to switch to something else. And it's just like you lose all momentum. So again, part of my rubric, part of the way I evaluate opportunities is having an understanding of what is the CRM, what are the tools you use, who is responsible for this, where does it report to, how are our reporting capabilities, things like that. It's almost like a discovery, right?
Yeah, the tech
Where
stack audit.
it's a tech stack audit, 100%. And by the way, I mean, my entire career, so for over 15 years, I only used Salesforce. And then in the past year, in 2023, when I started my consulting practice, I only used HubSpot. And I set multiple clients up on HubSpot. So I became very well versed on all things HubSpot. And if I didn't know how to do something in HubSpot, the community is just unbelievable. And there's so many help articles. And it's unbelievable how user friendly it is. And it was a really nice surprise to come into a HubSpot shop for the first time ever. We're like with a full time opportunity here at Moment, where there's a HubSpot shop, and it is very nice. No knock on Salesforce. Again, I used to say I will never work anywhere that isn't using Salesforce. Now it's nice to be able to say I can do both.
Sure.
But yeah, very much, Amy, to your point, I very much was a tech stack, sales stack, full stack, revenue stack audit. Not so much on the tech side of things. I don't really touch those, but I am super interested in how data flows. Like, do we have some sort of internal proprietary system that we use? A lot of companies do, like their own sort of engine that they come up with like a cute name for. We have that at Moment. That, like, how is that data? Where is the data going? Is it stuck in that system? Or is it being pushed into this, which is inevitably making its way to HubSpot or Sisense or whatever it is that we're using? How easy is it going to be for me to get the data that I need in order to be able to make decisions quickly? Ultimately, that's what I'm trying to uncover.
We've had a couple of conversations where it sounds like the data piece or technology piece could be viewed as an asset for the company, but on the flip side could also be a liability if those things are not lined up correctly. I'm curious if you have any stories that you could share about that, or
Yeah. So I've worked at two different fintech companies, Moment being one of them, Green Sky another, where you have so much data, which is a blessing and a curse. Because if the data is unstructured and it can't be structured in a way that is actually digestible, or if there are any points where the data is not reliable or trustworthy, that's almost worse
Sure.
than not having access to the data, because you're waiting and then you get data that you think is accurate and you make decisions on it that are wrong. So, do I have experience with it? Yeah, unfortunately, I do. I have had experiences with that, but it's kind of like a trust but verify situation now, where I've learned from mistakes. And I think that I'm fortunate that I have reporting into me, I have two sales analysts who work across all the different systems internally, and I trust them completely, and they will tell me if for whatever reason the data isn't trustworthy, not what they're producing but what they're looking at. So I think the sales analyst or the data analyst role in being able to be that sort of first line of defense on accuracy and usability of the data is really critical. I've also really challenged my data analysts, my sales analysts to become good storytellers, and which is difficult for a lot of data analysts to be able to kind of step out of that. They only speak in numbers and spreadsheets, but I'm challenging them to be able to tell a narrative around what the data is telling us. So great, you just produced a bunch of data, like, and a lot of the time their job is very reactive, like, hey, I need this, cool, I'll go do it, here it is. But I'm asking them to also be more proactive. So like the two biggest pushes are tell a story behind the data, like, are you seeing something, help me look around the corners. I give them that level of faith and trust that I trust them enough to be able to like provide me with that guidance. I'm able to review data pretty well, and I pretty savvy when it comes to that. I've been around it for so long, but they're looking at it through a different lens than I am, probably way more carefully than I am. So one is like, can you tell the narrative? Can you help me look at this set of data and decipher it and make it a digestible manner so that I can do something with it, make it actionable? And then two, like I said, is that proactive nature. Like, can we look ahead, not just look back? Like being able to look back at a subset or set of data and say, this is what happened. That's good. That's really good. That's important. So you don't let history repeat itself. You learn from, again, you win or you learn. But also, are we able to look at that in a forward looking manner and say, okay, if we do these things, these are good leading indicators for XYZ, whatever it is. There's a lot of that going on right now. Spent the last couple of weeks really, really slicing up like so many different data sources. There's an abundance of data right now. Slicing it up and making sure that we trust the data. I came up with this Google sheet, this Google Doc that's called the Big List of Metrics. It's actually called, I'll spare the profanity, but the Big A S list of metrics.
I love it. The big
And
ass list of metrics. I
yeah,
love it. Yeah.
the big ass list of metrics. There we go. Okay.
Yeah.
By the way, I don't trust people who don't
This
curse.
show is
I'll
not for kids, so don't worry.
kids, I'm sorry, but an ass is also a donkey, so it's
So that's
okay.
fair.
But it's the big ass list of metrics, and it's all the things that I want to be able to track for our revenue organization. And basically, it was like, okay, and let's go find these things and find the sources for them, and like let's produce this report, let's produce this view for the executive team, for the board, and then also for the rest of the enterprise, so they have transparency into what we're doing. And then also we can use this as our barometer for how well we're doing, not just backwards, looking back, like here's how we did in March, but also as like mile markers along the way throughout the month, like are the leading indicators painting a good picture or not?
Mm-hmm.
And are you finding you're having to develop some of those KPIs for your teams?
I think that this is still a fairly junior organization. I mean, the company's only 5 years old and the sales team sort of just exploded with growth. So I think that this is like the next phase of the company where, one of the main reasons I was brought in is to apply sort of that rigor and discipline around those types of metrics, where before it was very kind of the growth was happening, right? It was just happening and no one could really point to why
Okay.
or what was causing it. And that's where, looking back at the numbers, be like, we did awesome, but why did we do
Yeah.
awesome? And how do we continue that? And if are there any of those leading indicators that we could spot as warning signs if we're not trending, if we're not pacing, that we aren't going to do awesome and we can course correct.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, a lot of the KPIs are brand spanking new, hot off the press on the big ass list of metrics.
Cool. Love it.
So
love it.
Yeah.
Jason, do you at the moment have a RevOps function?
It's split between, I have a HubSpot admin and a HubSpot analyst, and then I have 2 sales analysts. So I think the RevOps function is sort of split between the 4 of them. They work really closely together, and depending on what we need, they sort of divide and conquer. I was making the push to have HubSpot be the source of truth, and I think we'll get there. I just think it's cleaner and easier to just pull everything directly from HubSpot. But with there being a lot of silos from a data perspective,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be a work in progress to be able to make everything kind of flow in and out of bidirectionally from HubSpot. So we're going to get there, but there's a lot to track. Like I'll give you an example from the way that companies like Moment actually make money is we charge a certain percentage we call dealer fees. So the home improvement contractor, I'll give you an example. We purchased the home we're in now at the end of 2022. It's a 30 plus year old house. It needs new windows. Windows are very expensive. We had someone come out, give us a quote for windows, and during their sales pitch, they offered promotional financing. If we went forward with taking that loan, which we didn't, we ended up going with another route. But if we ended up moving forward with that loan, that dealer, the Windows dealer, would have paid a commission back to the home improvement financing company.
Right.
It was a Moment, and I won't give any of my competitors a plug for free. So, but it was another company, and they would have paid, a percentage on top of that. So that's how we make money. So I need to be able to track for my sales team the way that they make money, my individual sales team, my individual sellers, they make money based off the merchants that they've enrolled, the contractors that they've closed and brought in and trained and taught how to offer financing, like what their sales are through our platform. So they're getting a piece of that.
Mm-hmm.
That is in like 3 different places right now.
Okay.
So trying to get it all to flow through one platform so it's easy to see, not just from a company perspective, but more, also from the rep to be able to know, here's how I'm tracking for the month, for the quarter, how much commission am I earning? I always look at that data in real time as an amazing motivational factor for the sales rep to push even harder, to, work harder, work extra hours, try to get that extra deal across the finish line if there are accelerators in play, much more than a sales manager breathing down their neck telling them to work harder. salespeople know how to work their commission plans,
Mm-hmm.
and the more visibility and transparency they have into their, how they're tracking, how they're pacing, that is, I think, the ultimate motivating factor.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And then just sort of quickly back to the four people that are essentially fulfilling that RevOps function, at least from a sales ops perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Are they also covering like the marketing ops component and or the
Yeah.
service ops component? Okay.
Yeah, marketing and so service it's in HubSpot, and then one of our internal systems, proprietary systems. So they're working on a connection between the two,
Mm-hmm.
and then marketing is primarily out of HubSpot, fortunately. So the folks that cover HubSpot are able to cover those three teams, and the analyst can cover the remaining gap of what HubSpot can.
Cool.
So it's a team effort right now. Like I said, I prefer to have everything through one single source of truth. I think it's just much easier,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody can just pull reporting, dashboards, etc. from there. It's a pretty big lift, but hopefully we can get there. In the meantime, it is a couple different places, which is why we did the big ass list of metrics and trying to find sources for everything. So it's all published in one place and easy to find.
Yeah, I mean, it's super cool how this is all kind of unfolded here in these first 20, 25 minutes of the conversation, because when we talk about and essentially implement a RevOps framework for clients, you go through the alignment of your people / teams, the alignment of your processes, which is your SLAs and handoffs from marketing to sales to service. And then you get in the third layer is the data, right? The metrics, the KPIs, OKRs, whatever term you use for tracking your data between marketing, sales, and service. And only then do you get into the tech stack or the systems that you're using to track all that data and making sure that the processes, the SLAs, and finally the alignment of the people is all happening, right? So that's essentially the RevOps function. And
Yeah.
I guess the good news from what I'm hearing is that, I mean, you're doing everything in exactly the right way, which is
Yes.
you're getting, I mean, your teams are aligned because you have clear targets. It sounds like between you and the marketing leader, and I'm assuming however the service side is set up at moment, you all know what your targets are. So marketing knows what their targets are, which aligns with your targets for sales, which aligns with services targets, right?
Yep.
Which is so the process to the data, and really the next step over time, which and these things do take time. And a lot of our sort of tech roadmaps for our clients, it's a 3-year process, because it's not just solving for the tech, because every time you implement, even if you're simplifying the tech to get to that single source of truth, that then has an impact on your data and your processes, which then have to be tweaked. There's got to be training, which then impacts the teams, et cetera. So it just worked out really nicely the way you've explained it, which obviously then also proves that you know what you're doing,
Yeah.
Well, and that you did your homework when you decided to take this role. I mean, you've thought about a lot of these factors in advance of coming into the organization. And we have had conversations with people who were like, ugh, that piece is missing. And it makes your job a lot harder.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that you do when you come into a new role is you lay out a 30, 60, 90. And I'm a firm believer in having a 30, 60, 90. And that doesn't necessarily mean 30 days, the next 30 days, the next 30 days. It's just breaking it into thirds. It's because it moves a lot faster than 30 days, 30 days, 30 days. And I think that allows you to, and my general philosophy on that is, first third is like just observations. Like you're talking to everybody, understanding like who does what, lots of answering like the who, what, when, where, why, and hows. The second third is starting to ideate or starting to, come up with ideas of like, okay, I think this is where I should be spending my time. This is what I should be prioritizing. This looks very broken. This doesn't exist. I need this in order to move forward, blah, 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 whatever it is. And then that final third is like, all right, time to execute. And you can't skip any of that, because what ends up happening, again, this is from experience, both positive and negative experiences in having done this, is you kind of have to ruthlessly prioritize. Like when you come in, there are a million things you want to fix, and you can't, because you just can't. There's not enough time. And then you're just going to end up doing a lot of things half-assed. And it's better to just focus on like, what are the one or two or three, if you really need to, like, what are the three big rocks that you need to move right now?
Mm-hmm.
Again, this is just my take on it. Everybody else might have different philosophies on it. This has just worked well for me. Like, what are the three big rocks that we need to move right now? And focus all your attention on that. And also just, I think I've done a good job of communicating that with my leaders and then the rest of the team, just so that they understand, all right, this new guy started, like, why isn't he fixing everything? Like, so a lot of the one-on-ones I had is, I spoke with everybody in my organization, obviously my direct reports and all the way down to individual contributors, wanted to get to know them, wanted to hear what their take on everything was, the current situation, what they would love to see happen, so that I can make my list. And then, when I come up with that prioritization, sharing that with the team. Like, these are the three big things that I'm going to focus on first. There are a lot of other things that are going to be done after that, and we'll knock them out in some sort of sequential order. But these are the three big ones. And that has worked really well because, like I said, no one is sitting there wondering, like, what is he doing? Like, everybody knows what I'm working on. Also, the fact that we're sort of a hybrid work environment. I have an office. I'm in there most of the time. Today, I'm working from home, but I'm normally in the office, and I have this big whiteboard, and it looks like Goodwill Hunting or a Beautiful Mind in there. It's just like, or a serial killer, like somewhere like
The
a combination of
Zodiac.
those three. The Zodiac, yeah, exactly.
The accountant or something.
So
Yeah.
yeah, Beautiful Minds, whatever, right? So they can see I'm clearly cooking up something. But yeah, I'm very transparent about the things that I'm working on, and I'm also transparent about, like, hey, that is important. This takes precedence right now. I will get to that. And yeah, going back to the data and walking into bad situations, I don't know how you can make informed decisions or feel like you're going in the right direction if the data is in a rocky spot to begin with. So for me, that was like a big deal initially, of understanding the data, understanding that, again, the big ass list of metrics. Like, I don't know if anything that we roll out is going to work or not, or how it's doing, if we don't have a baseline, a
Mhm.
reliable baseline on agreed upon OKRs, KPI, most of KPIs. What are we tracking, and is the data source reliable? And can we track it in real time? How do we report on it? How frequently do we report on it? What do we do when something is good or bad? Like, there's a lot of methodology behind it, instead of just being like, are we doing a good job? I don't know.
Yeah.
So getting the house in order is really important. And I feel like a lot of times you see people come in, leaders come in, new leaders come in, and they just kind of go kamikaze style and just start trying to shake things up. And that's very dangerous. Like, I don't know how you know how something is working or not if you haven't taken the opportunity to sort of do that audit and figure out, what you're working with.
Yeah, it sounds like you take a very intentional approach to looking at everything. And I noticed the word that you used, rock. I'm wondering if that comes from the EOS, if you guys use that there at Moment, or that's something you've used in your organizations prior to this. Because
I've heard it. I don't know exactly where to credit it to or where it was from, but I've heard it used multiple times, and it's one of those things that have just stuck with me that I like.
we're big fans.
Yeah.
Yeah, we use the entrepreneurial operating system, or EOS, as
Yep.
the same. And a lot of our clients and our listeners either currently use EOS as their operating model, their business operating model, or they did in the past. And then, of course, they grew potentially beyond and adopted a different operating model, but it definitely works. And I've heard similar analogies, like the three bowling balls. You can only really hold three bowling balls at one time safely,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
we like the rocks.
I am not trying to give myself more credit than I deserve, but I've sort of Frankenstein my own sort of operating manual over the years, and picking bits and pieces from different thought leaders or different leaders that I like working with or for. I've read a lot. I've watched a lot. I've had the chance to mentor and be mentored. And so I've seen a lot of different ways of doing things. And again, like, I always come up with sort of my own operating manual. I don't really do anything like straight out of a book. I do things that make sense for me and my style of being able to execute on a plan. I've got, like, it's just ways that I do things that I know work for me. So anything that's like too prescriptive, that's not designed by me, I think it would end up failing.
Yeah.
So when it comes to things like that, a specific terminology that's definitely like borrowed from other bits and pieces. Like there's some books that I always recommend to people. I'm having one of my leaders just recently promoted from an individual contributor and is trying to get the most out of her team. First time as a leader, I'm like, Radical Candor is a fantastic philosophy, fantastic book.
Yep.
So I think it's all like very situational and like what the person's trying to accomplish at the time. But I will say that there have been a couple of books, a couple authors, a couple thought leaders that have really influenced me in the way that I design my teams. And like Mark Roberge is one, Jason Jordan. There are a lot of thought leaders like that have written unbelievable, put out like amazing books and just amazing content and workshops and things like that I've absorbed and kind of created my own sort of
the Jason
proprietary
Rozenblat playbook.
JRP. That's right.
Yeah, well, what we always say when people question whether it's EOS or scaling up or whatever model people use, my typical recommendation is it doesn't really matter what operating model or system or playbook you use, just have one that you use.
I agree.
Because kind of going back to what you were saying earlier, everything you do starts strategically and then which creates your focus, whether it's for 90 days or whatever the period of time is. And then somehow you have to make that practical and executionable. So then you step into execution. But in order to do that, you need to have a scorecard or what's the data or the KPIs. And, ultimately all these operating models do the same thing. I think one of the most valuable things that come out of these is just a common language that people understand what they call things,
Yeah, I agree. I just love, the checklist manifesto is just, being able to make sure that, there's the ideation phase where you can get in a room and I love a good whiteboard session, as I mentioned, but then like, okay, how do you actually start to execute on it? And, a lot of across a variety of different projects and scales and size, fail on the execution part because there wasn't really like a very clear strategy on how to get this project off the ground. So it may look awesome on a spreadsheet, it may look awesome on a whiteboard, and in most cases the ideas are very good, but to take that like step by step approach, very deliberate approach, very calculated approach to actually getting from A to Z is a lot harder to do than most realize. And I agree with you completely, Brendan. Like the idea of having like a system doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be the JRP, but you have to have some sort of a system. There has to be something that is put into a process that you can follow. Otherwise, you're just winging it. And in most cases, like you could be flexible enough where like, okay, this isn't working and you could pivot. One of my favorite terms, especially having worked in a lot of startups, is the fail fast methodology. And like, all right, this isn't working. What's plan B? But, have the flexibility to be able to pivot if you need to, but not having a sort of systematized like process is dangerous. I think you could steer off track very quickly and then not know how to get back.
Right. Yeah. Especially if you're trying to grow something, right? Obviously if you're a solo consultant, contributor, or whatever, all you need to do is have the system in your own mind. But as soon as you want to grow or scale something, you need to be able to share with everybody else around you how that roadmap's going to work.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is, so when I was in my 20s living in New York City, I was a co-founder for a small startup. We raised a little bit of seed money, and there were a handful of us in New York, one out in California, and then some developers in India. And we were just trying to get this thing off the ground. And we ended up shutting it down after a couple of years, but we raised a little bit of money. We didn't know what the hell we were doing. So that was the smallest company that I had ever personally been part of. And then come 2023, when I'm doing consulting, there were a couple companies where, that I was working with that were 10 people and like one or two salespeople. And joining, what I found is being able to build out a just basic step-by-step playbook for like the customer lifecycle, like what is supposed to happen at each of these steps. And it's an iterative process. People have to realize that it is not something that's set in stone. You're going to learn a lot. You're going to modify it. You're going to tweak the hell out of that thing. But like, what should happen? What do you think should happen? is the first call like you're just trying to schedule a demo, and then you follow up with the demo, and then who's on the demo? What are you showing them? Are you using Zoom? Are you using Google? Like really like being prescriptive and laying that all out. So helping these companies really define that part of the process is so critical to like getting off to the races and starting to learn as much as you can.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next iteration of that is stages and pipeline management and how telling that is, because that's part of the customer life cycle as well. Like, okay, you have a bunch of deals in your pipeline. What is going on with any of them? How are these real? What do you need to do to move? Think of it as like it has to go from this step to that step. What needs to happen? Very prescriptive steps on what needs to happen in order for you to have the confidence to move this deal from here to here. And that was one of those things that when I decided to get into consulting and start my own business, I just took for granted that I thought everybody knew how to do that. And it's become very clear that there are some very brilliant startup founders that have amazing skill at whether they're just coming up with a brand new idea or coming up with a better idea of something that exists and going out and building a V1 and going out and getting their first couple customers. Like those are things that to me are so hard to do. The amount of bravery you need and belief you need in your product. But the stuff that I just mentioned of like thinking through that process, they don't know how the hell to do any of that stuff.
Yeah,
It's a different skill set.
That's not the.
It's not their skill set.
Yeah.
I can't code. Like I could learn eventually, but I don't know how to do that now. So to me, that is like a very foreign concept. The same way that coming up with pipeline stages in a CRM is like I could do that all day. I've been doing it forever. It's so easy. I know exactly what to look for. I know exactly how to do it. I know exactly how to execute it. I know exactly how to run. I know all that stuff. Like it's a native language for me, the same way that writing in, Python or whatever is for someone with more of a technical background. So yeah, a lot of these things we're talking about are taken for granted, and it's not that common knowledge at all.
Yeah, well, I can speak from experience there as a startup founder that I still don't know how to do that. But it's a good thing we have people on our team who know how to do that.
You hire people that are smarter than you. That's the key. That's what I've learned.
Yeah, well, and I mean, it all comes back to teamwork, right? It's surround yourself with people who are smarter than you are at different things. Yeah,
different things. Yeah. Yes, exactly.
So collectively, you're
subject matter experts.
Correct.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I agree.
Good stuff, Jason. So as we wrap up here, is there anything that you want to sort of repeat, or maybe something you haven't said that you'd like to share as some advice for anyone listening?
I think that I was on LinkedIn early days. I was working at a startup in New York City called The Ladders, and we were convinced that we were going to be the next big thing, and LinkedIn was a fad. So I've been on LinkedIn since 2006. So I've always been a huge fan. I've always gotten a ton of value out of it, and have leveraged the hell out of LinkedIn for networking, for learning as much as I can. There are a lot of really great thought leaders putting out a lot of unbelievable content for free on LinkedIn all the time. And if you want inspiration, if you want to learn about specific topics, it's just become an incredible platform. There's a lot of noise, but you could cut through the noise and find thought leaders, subject matter experts on whatever it is that you're trying to learn about. And fortunately, everybody who's been shy about posting on LinkedIn, I think they're kind of coming out of their shells a little bit and are a lot more vocal on there. Maybe it's because ChatGPT is helping them write the content, which is totally fine also. So, which is another point I'll bring up in a second. But LinkedIn is great for following and finding thought leaders on whatever the topic is, joining communities. Like I've been a member of Pavilion, which used to be Revenue Collective for years now. I've had dozens of unbelievable conversations with other leaders across the globe that are, experiencing similar challenges or whatever, or people have reached out to me for help on things. So like tap into the network. It's a global network. LinkedIn is obviously free. Things like Chief or Pavilion are paid, but it's something that, you could expense through your company if there's like an education allowance. So I highly recommend doing that. Don't be shy about asking people for help. The worst they could do is say no or not respond. Best is you're having a 15-minute conversation with someone that can help solve whatever challenge you're dealing with. And then the second thing is I'm still very early days, although I consider myself probably a little bit further along than others. I think a lot of the AI tools out there today are fantastic. I mean, there have been times where I'm stuck on a problem and I'll just ask the actual question into ChatGPT and then start responding to it as if I'm talking to somebody, which is the intent. As weird as that may be for some, like, get out of your comfort zone a little bit, because it's an inevitability at this point that AI is going to be a huge part of everyone's lives. And I've found a ton of value in looking at ChatGPT and going to ChatGPT for asking for feedback, advice on a variety of things. Even if it's what I had mentioned before, if you have writer's block, you don't know what to say, you don't know how to say it, and you want help, use ChatGPT.
Right.
Like, it's a game changer. And I think the more that people can embrace that quickly, they'll just have an edge over everybody who's kind of reluctant to get into it.
I love
Very
that.
cool.
I love both of those suggestions.
Yeah.
I want to go back to LinkedIn a little bit because I've noticed, I don't think I've been on since 2006, but I joined LinkedIn like pretty early in my career. And it didn't feel like the connections there were necessarily genuine. It was like, oh, we've been at an event at the same time and exchanged business cards, and now we are connected on LinkedIn. But today, it's facilitating conversations like this. It's how we came to meet you and have this awesome conversation about RevOps. And that is what I'm appreciating about LinkedIn today versus how it was, I think, in the early
Without
days.
a doubt. And by the way, like, there's still elements of that today. I think there's always like a downside to networks like that. They're open networks. So I think a lot of people throw the baby out with the bathwater and they're like, oh, I had a bad experience on LinkedIn, so, I don't like it. And I think you're just not looking at, I think you're overgeneralizing. Like, there's far more benefit if you use it properly, which is a big overstatement. I think that there are people that are just overwhelmed by, like, I don't even know where to start, which, again, there's a lot of content out there on how to leverage LinkedIn, how to get the most out of LinkedIn. There are a lot of thought leaders just talking about how to leverage LinkedIn more or properly, or LinkedIn for beginners. There's a lot of stuff out there that will allow you to kind of sift through. There's a lot of noise. Like, the most popular posts I've ever shared, I think, some of them that I've ever shared are like they're not providing any actual value or thought. It's totally like sarcastic, like, hey, just want to let everybody know I'm still not interested in owning a franchise and I don't need lead generation services. Because I would say 50% of my in-mail is, hey, Jason, you seem like the perfect profile for somebody who'd like to start their own franchise. Hey, Jason, we offer lead gen services, which the irony in that is the second one is like, their messaging is so bad that I'm like, how are you possibly doing good lead gen if your approach about lead gen is
So terrible.
like, it's so bad. It's from like 20 years
volumes.
ago. It's so spammy.
Jason, thanks so much. This was an awesome.
This was great. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, my pleasure. I enjoyed it.
What is the best way for folks to reach you?
Yeah, LinkedIn. I'm always active on LinkedIn. I spend throughout the day anywhere from an hour to like 2 hours a day just catching up on different posts. Occasionally I post on there as well. Try to keep the content pretty light, but sometimes I've got a pretty decent idea, or at least I think is a pretty decent idea, that I'll share. And I've built a pretty decent following over the years. So
cool.
Yeah, LinkedIn is always the best
And it's
place.
Jason Rozenblat, or is straight? There's no initials or okay.
No.
Cool.
No.
Awesome. Well, Jason, thanks again.
Yeah, we'll let you get back to your day.
Thank you both. Thank you so much.
We'll talk to you again soon.
All right, sounds good.
Take care.
Bye.
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 Did you enjoy this episode?
Find more at RevOpsChampions.com.